Howdy, folks. Happy Tuesday. We are back. We've got a couple trades to discuss, some injury news that may affect what teams do before the trade deadline next Monday. But Russ started off with our pre-show.
Okay, so my day started off once again with like my daily Houston Astros update, and it's never good. This one says Astros pitcher Francis Martes is suspended for 162 games. So he's suspended for a complete season without pay because he got tested for boldenone, and he got caught last March. So again, speaking of the lawless nature of the Houston Astros, this seems to fit right in with the culture. Then, I want to say it was 20 minutes later, and I'm going to say usually mild-mannered Nick Markakis, because I've never found this guy to be anything but a gentleman.
Yes.
Basically says that the Astros deserve a beating. But I have to say, this is where players are at right now. And players are trying to police the sport because none of them are happy with the way Rob Manfred just gave immunity maybe before he got more facts. And so now they're going to basically take care of it like frontier justice style. And whether that's in beanings or just in horrible quotes, and other media people are going to dig into this further because nobody feels like there's closure. So right now, Major League Baseball is in turmoil. They probably will get more viewers on TV because of this, but I think they're going to get fewer people showing up to the ballpark because I think this is going to get a lot of people mad.
Joe, it's to the point here where Bob Nightingale, a very respected writer, I believe still for USA Today, came out yesterday and said that they're taking betting lines in Vegas on who gets hit most by pitches for the Astros. Bregman is 1-1, Springer is 2-1, and Altuve is 3. I'll take the Altuve 3-1. I think he's going to get it the most.
I mean, I would take Altuve if it were me.
I don't know. He's a small target, so it's true. Makes it a little bit more difficult.
He might pull a Sean Estes and throw over his head.
They'll be aiming
nowhere near him. But I mean, Russ, I got to disagree with you. You're saying people aren't gonna show up. I completely disagree. I think every Astros game you're gonna have every knucklehead buying tickets for it to both yell at them, because who doesn't want to yell at them. But also, you're going to see a guy get plunked. You're going to see a team.
No, that's fine. I'm talking overall attendance, not when the Astros are in town. I get the Astros effect, but I see a lot of people getting fed up with the overall effect.
Yeah, and I don't know. Like, I know that pitchers and catchers have reported. I didn't think that everyday players had reported yet, but I saw something where a Yankee fan in Florida at spring training games, his plan is to go to the Houston Astros game, and every time Altuve and Bregman and Correa come up, he's going to bring a garbage can and bang on it. Mm-hmm. So, I guess that's the Yankee fan sort of petty revenge, but I like it. I admire the ingenuity there.
It's a fascinating thing, and MLB's very milquetoast response to everything is just making it a lot worse. You could take the visual of Bud Selig just kind of throwing his hands up at the All-Star game in Milwaukee and just throw it up on top of everything. It has nothing to do with him, but that's sort of the response out of Rob Manfred and all them, is that they're just kind of like, what do you mean? You don't like that we're trying to get all the information out of this and we're giving everybody a pass? Like, no, of course they don't like that. Nobody wants that. The guys that were involved in it, punish them. And instead, it's just kind of like, well, yeah, of course we were doing this. Just don't sit me for any games. Like, the whole thing where, Manfred calls the trophy, a piece of metal, and like, who cares who has it? Like,
right.
Why even have a regular season? Why have a playoff? Right. If you're not gonna care about the award you hand out at the end, it's all stupid.
Yeah, I just think the drip, and this would be the last thing. I just think the drip of new revelations and new news throughout the season, it's going to end. I would be shocked if it doesn't end up in Manfred reopening the investigation, because if there's anything out there, if there's any kind of proof of the buzzers in 2019 or anything else that the Astros did that isn't out there yet, it's going to get out there. Somebody's going to spill, and this is just going to be an ongoing thing until maybe there's some what people perceive as justice in the situation.
Just wait for the Red Sox investigation to close, whatever that decides that. Like, that's the next thing to happen.
That's the next big bomb at the end of next week that's going to happen. You're right. That's when, and by the way, I do have to applaud John Henry for being as obtuse an owner as the Red Sox were back when they sold Babe Ruth to the Yankees. He basically gave almost the same explanation for losing Mookie Betts in a trade and saying how much better this will make them. And this quote from the Red Sox back in the day for Ruth was basically like, well, the Yankees were the only ones with a lot of money, and this will benefit us down the road. And it's like, yeah, I don't think it did, and I don't think this will benefit the Red Sox either.
Well, the funny thing is, Russ, that Bill Simmons, who's a monster Red Sox fan, said that John Henry should fund the revival of No No Nanette on Broadway just to make it have some symmetry from 100 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, just the best thing that I can come up with for the Red Sox is, and I saw another signing today, another former player signed with the Brewers, I forget his name. They just want to save money. They made about $519 million last year, which was a record for them. And they're going to rake in a little more because they're going to have less payroll. That's the end result of what the Red Sox are doing this year. They have bailed out of this year because of the losing of Alex Cora and the whole scandal. And baseball's in turmoil, man. It's a mess. And one last thing, the saddest thing I've ever seen on Twitter, that Jim Carrey said he spent all of his summer vacation in Buffalo.
Oh, come on.
If you want to talk about a tortured childhood, that's it, man.
I'm upset I didn't run into him anywhere. That would have been a dream to just end up hanging out someplace downtown and like, I think I know that. Oh my God, it's Jim Carrey. That would have made my life to meet a guy like that. You kidding me? Well, probably would have made him leave Buffalo right away though.
Oh yeah.
What you don't know is that was all research for Bruce Almighty. Because it was based in Buffalo. So
it was research for something, Mike, but I mean, that's a tough place to have vacation every year. That's all I'm saying.
That's true. Okay.
Summer's the best time here. Everybody hates winter. Summer's the best time.
I mean, it's good. There's no beaches. There's some drawbacks, Joe. I know it's a nice city. Don't get me wrong.
As long as you don't have to go to the Anchor Bar. Okay. Hello, Hockey World. Today is Tuesday, February 18th, 2020. Russ?
I'm Russ Cohen from Sportsology. Well, usually I go last. So,
and I'm Michael Agello, and this is the HockeyBuzzcast here on HockeyBuzzcast.com. And we are pleased to be joined today by Joe Yerdon, who covers the Sabres and the NHL for The Athletic. Hi, Joe.
Hi, guys. Good to be with you again.
Let's start with the big news from yesterday, the trade of Tyler Toffoli, which we were expecting. He was one of the 4 or 5 most prominent names on the rental trade deadline list. Toffoli goes to the Vancouver Canucks, who I didn't hear as them being like a leading candidate for him. So, but he goes to the Canucks along for Tim Schaller, a 2020 second-round pick, a conditional pick if Toffoli re-signs with the Canucks, and most importantly, Russ, prospect Tyler Madden. Joe, you first. What did you think of this deal?
I think it makes a lot of sense from Vancouver's part. There's some questions about Brock Besser's health that have come up recently, and Vancouver, I think they're in an unlikely spot that they've just been kind of rolling in all year. That division's bad. Vancouver's been pretty good this season, and they've got a real honest-to-goodness chance to kind of maybe punch out of a round in the postseason. So, hey, why not? Get out ahead of it. I mean, it's cliche at this point, but get out ahead of the deadline. Get the guy that you think is going to help you the most. And you know what? The price, Tyler Madden's going to be probably a pretty good player. He's a very good offensive player, and the draft pick, that's the cost of doing business to get a guy like that. But I like that move for Vancouver. I think that it's going to help them out a lot. And when Besser's feeling great, he's already a super dangerous guy, and you get a Toffoli to kind of get into that mix. That's, it's a lot of fun. I think Vancouver is probably the team that's the most enjoyable for me to watch out of that division, aside from Vegas. Vegas is Vegas, baby. But Vancouver, they do a lot of fun stuff, and there's a lot of very likable characters on that team.
Russ, I look at this deal and, maybe I'm emphasizing, but I think that when Furland went down with a concussion in Utica last week, they were trying to get him back in the lineup or see if he could get back in the lineup. And once that happened, then I think they probably went forward with going after somebody like Toffoli, because they definitely were looking for somebody with size on the wing. And I think Toffoli's more of a scorer than a guy like Wayne Simmons, who they were rumored to be interested in. But it makes sense that they went this way, because they believed that they needed somebody to fill the gap while Besser was out, and then when Besser comes back, to give them some depth of scoring.
I mean, they filled a need. They're desperate to stay in their playoff race. We know the Aquilino brothers pretty much have put out the edict they needed to make the playoffs. So they're doing their best in that regard, but they gave up a lot. I mean, for one thing, they gave up a 2020 pick, which, again, a lot of teams are trying to do the Lou thing and do the 2021. So the fact that you got them on a 2020, now Vancouver picks 75th in the draft, that's never great. I mean, go ask the Rangers. I think when they did it, Pavel Buchnevich was their first selection one year. So, and he's a decent player, don't get me wrong, but that's as good as it gets if you pick 75th. You know what I mean? That's so you've stunted that. Madden can be a second-line center, I think, in the NHL. I love his speed. The hockey IQ is off the charts. He is a very competent kid. He, needs to play a little better away from the puck. I don't care that he's 155 pounds. People need to get over that. Jack Hughes weighs that. Sam Girard weighs that. There's a bunch of guys now that weigh that. So to me, that's insignificant. But his passing and his skating and his scoring is real. And now you look at the Kings centers, and it's just unbelievable. I mean, they have Turcotte and Kupari and Velarde, and so that's, they have four of the best young centers really in the NHL as far as in the prospect system. So the Kings have really done an amazing job in the last 2 years and they have great talent evaluators over there. They do. I mean, Michael Food and Mark Yannetti know what they're doing. And, like Mike, we were talking last night, when they got the first pick of Bjornfot, that was to some maybe a little bit of a risky pick. And then he started playing with the Kings this year, and Drew Doughty loves him. So he'll probably be back next year. So you look at all these guys, Madden's probably a year away. The Kings are really setting the table here, and it's going to be really good for them. So as far as Vancouver, they need to go a couple rounds. Whether they can re-sign Toffoli or not, that's fine. He's not what he was 2 years ago. He could still score goals in this league. So, I mean, they've done worse with contracts. I'll say that.
I mean, Joe, the Kings are still in a hole with some of these long-term contracts with aging players like Carter and Brown and Quick. But to Russ's point, over the last year, the Muzzin deal, the deal for Toffoli, and then the deal for Campbell and Clifford, they've accumulated 5 draft picks. The one that they took Bjornfot, a couple seconds, a couple thirds. Trevor Moore, who's a speedy winger, Carl Grunstrom, who played on the Marlies 2018 Calder Cup team, and now Madden. They're getting speedy, skilled players in these deals, and that was something, and at least the speed was something that they didn't have. So Blake is doing a pretty good job replenishing the coffers of the Kings.
Yeah, addressing the speed was the big thing. I mean, the Kings were always the big, heavy, physical team, but the speed was becoming an issue for them. I mean, it's been an issue the last couple of seasons, and to Russ's point about Toffoli, I think that might be the only thing that surprises me on the deal, is that the price was still that high,
right?
Given the production. But I mean, some people, you look at that and you say, all right, well, this guy's still got to be viewed as that much of a cost, because he's still on the young side of things. Although depending on how you feel about where the cliff comes for players, whether you believe it's 30 or later,
it's the foot speed cliff that we worry about with him.
Yeah. So it's, there's that part. So, but, as far as the contract stuff, I mean, the Kings are kind of stuck with a lot of that. I mean, it's Carter, 2 more years of Carter. You've got Kopitar until 2024, and, he's 32. I mean, it's weird that the age just seemed to catch up with him awfully quickly, as far as, because in my mind, he's still like, oh, he's 25, right? He's still a young guy. No, he's not 25 anymore. But guys like him and Martinez and Doughty, they've got signed forever, and you have to try to find ways to cut losses where you can, and I think that's something Rob Blakes is kind of trying to figure out right now, and addressing that the issue they're going to have up the middle, with Kopitar getting older, Trevor Lewis is already kind of there, and you have Adrian Kempe, who's not really totally lived up to the height quite yet, and you've got a lot of questions up the middle. So trying to address that through the draft and trying to get all these guys squared away, it's a really smart idea. It's something that you have to be prepared for, and you have to know where your weaknesses are going to be a year or two down the road, and that's the way to do it. I mean, you're looking at maybe Turcotte, maybe he needs another year at Wisconsin. Madden, maybe he needs another year at college. So if you got the time, you can spend the time and just collect picks. And I think collecting picks for this draft upcoming is a little bit curious, especially down the road, down further back in the draft. But whatever, load up on prospects and see if you get some lottery tickets to pay off.
Well, the other thing is when they do this, Joe, and they grab these other centers, now it lets someone like Anderson Dolan really become a wing, because he probably wasn't going to be able to play center in the league. And now that does fill out the wing for them too. So this really does have good repercussions for them. And yeah, they just have to be patient, and they will be. Kel Clay will be up there before you know it too. I mean,
probably after they trade Martinez, because I think he's going to go next.
Yeah, so this is a team that, I could see not next year, but the year after, we're starting to say, hey, you know what? We're starting to see something come out of this team, and in 2-3 years, maybe contending.
Well, and one other thing about them is that you look at what they've had going on in their defense, and they've had some things just kind of work out for them. They get Joakim Ryan from San Jose, and that's working out pretty well. Matt Roy, I think, has been a very happy surprise for them. Mm-hmm. He got pressed into duty last season, and it was just, this is all we got. We got to play him, and now he's playing pretty well. Ben Hutton might be the one disappointing guy this season for him, but it's a lot of. It was an area that started to look like it was going to be a disaster area for a while, but I don't think they're as bad on the D side of things. But up front, I mean, they need more. Can't just coast on Kopitar and Iafallo to try to do everything for you. And that's trying to fill the needs and do it on your own. I mean, it's the best way to do it, especially when you got contracts you can't get rid of.
Yeah, and the one thing I think is a common thread with the deals that have been made over the last couple of days, Joe, is that I think the prices have been higher than expected. I mean, I didn't expect the Devils to get a second round pick and a prospect for Andy Green. I know it was a controlled situation where he was only going to go to the Islanders, but even that, I mean, you would think that the price would have been a little bit more reasonable. A number one in Nolan Foote for Blake Coleman is a steep price. It may be worth it because he's got another year, but now this deal, I think that Vancouver gave up a lot more than I thought that LA was going to get for Toffoli. So maybe that says that the prices, because they're not that as many sellers as people think, the prices are going to be really expensive in the next 6 days.
I think if teams are going to hold the line at getting a first round pick for guys that they value as the rentals that are going to get a first round pick, that to me says the deadline's not going to be as busy as it is, because that price is getting set now. That's tough.
I think you'll see some teams bend, Joe, with the 2021 first. I think that's what'll happen, and that could, and teams are still willing to accept that as currency because they can still show their fan base, hey, we got a first round pick. I think that will still work out, because like with the Islanders trade, there's no question that Lou probably went right back to his staff and said, well, what's better, if we draft in the second round this year or we draft in the second round next year? And clearly it was next year. So the Devils accepted the 2021 second rounder in the Andy Green trade, and basically the Islanders could still stay the course. I think we're going to see a few teams do that.
Well, one team that might trade a first could be Colorado, but they have a lot of assets as well. And there was a rather entertaining 4-3 game between the Lightning and the Avalanche yesterday. The Lightning win it. I think it was Kucherov that scored a winning goal.
Yeah.
But in that game, Colorado suffers a really critical injury. Rantanen goes into the boards after being tripped by Eric Cernak. He breaks his collarbone. He's out 6 to 8 weeks. And, Joe, we thought that Colorado was going to be in the mix for, maybe Kreider or another forward. Now I think it's almost a necessity with Rantanen being out for most of the rest of the regular season, and them being in a tight race with St. Louis and Dallas for positioning in the Central. Yeah,
that's losing Rantanen's not an easy one to deal with. I mean, he's so good, he's so talented. They've had to deal a little bit this season without him. early on, and I think the thought was that once he got back, they were good to go, and things were going to be okay. But he's picked up pretty well from where he left off. I mean, he missed about 16 games, and he's still a point per game guy. I mean, that's really difficult to lose out on, and they could use the help. I mean, you've got Kadri, who is banged up. You've got some questions there, and they do have some guys that are playing a little bit above where you thought they would. I mean, they've gotten way more out of Nichushkin than I think anybody thought they were going to get out of him. Burakovsky's been a very good addition to that team, but they're pretty thin. It's good depth, but it's not a lot going on there. They could stand to add somebody for sure, and I think that's something where the spot that they're in. I mean, they're thinking playoffs, obviously, and you have to move forward with it. And I think that's something where you look at how that team's set up, and that's a tight race in that division. I'm just looking at it right now. Forgive me for that, but I mean, if you want to try to avoid Dallas or St. Louis in that first round, you can do it, and you got to push a button. And I think they've been helped out because St. Louis has cooled off. Dallas, I think, is just they're kind of all over the place. They're a true wild card in that sense, where you don't know what you're going to quite get out of them, other than Ben Bishop being incredible. But I think for Colorado, I mean, you're looking at Rantanen in 6 to 8 weeks. Timing wise, you're looking at him maybe coming back second round of the playoffs, maybe end of the first round, around there. It's a tightrope to walk without having one of your top players,
or if they push him, probably middle of the first round, because I think it's just under 7 weeks to go in the regular season. So I mean, but I don't think they want to rush him because but this is the situation. I mean, Colorado has the most cap space at the deadline of any team, so they have options in terms of where they need to go. But now you've got Kadri out; he's out indefinitely, Russ. You've got Rantanen out.
His exact injury?
What? Kadri's a high ankle sprain.
Okay, so he'll be back by the playoffs.
He'll be back by the playoffs, right? But right now, right now, it means that there's more of a focus on McKinnon without Kadri in the line.
Right, but he could survive that, okay.
Right? So Rantanen's out for 6 to 8 weeks, and Grubauer is out indefinitely. So if you're Sakic, what priority is first? To me, it's the goaltender. I think
it's still going first.
Yeah. And now, Joe, we were talking about this yesterday, and Russ suggested a guy like Jimmy Howard, because there's a number of rental veteran goaltenders. Maybe Corey Crawford is on the market with Chicago because Chicago is not in it, and they have him and Leonard. I think the perfect fit for Colorado might be Craig Anderson, and I don't think he'd be that expensive to get. What do you think?
I like the idea of Anderson. I mean, that's familiar territory for him. He's been in Denver before. I would be very wary on Jimmy Howard, only because his performance this season has been so tough.
Right, but here's my thinking on Howard. He had a good game last game. I could get him cheap. I still have Francouz. Francouz could probably hold the load, and so I don't have to bankrupt myself, and maybe then I could also go and trade Kreider. I think Ottawa will soak them for Anderson, because Anderson is so well liked in the area. They're not just letting him go for a song.
Yeah, that to me is the hang up on Anderson. They do love him there, and I think for him, depending on what his future holds, I think that might be the question where if he's thinking about maybe it's time to just kind of call it a day. I don't think he's in that position, but you never know.
Right.
But if he's in that position where it's like, this team isn't going to see playoffs probably in another year or so, for at least a year or two, maybe.
A year or 10, yeah.
Yeah. So then you start thinking about, well, where else could I go? And if Denver calls, I think that's one where if you're Anderson, you got to really think about it long and hard, and then hope that, that deal can come through. I think Pierre Dorian's done okay on his trades of late, but back to Howard. Howard to me is interesting. I mean, yes, it's a bad season. Yes, he's had that good recent start, but he's such a unbelievable competitor. I mean, anytime man, he gets his back up, and he's just he makes a difference. And I think back to when everybody was handing the throne over in Detroit to Mrazek, And suddenly it was, it was part of that was Mrazek didn't take it and run with it. But the other part of that is that Howard was like, no, this is my job. You're not taking it from me.
Right.
I think there's something to be said about that. Now, mind you, if you bring Jimmy Howard into that situation and say, listen, you're going to hold down until we get Grubauer back and he's our guy.
But you don't have to say that to him because you don't know what's going to happen with Grubauer. You could just bring in Jimmy Howard and see what you got. He does have a good playoff record. So, what if all of a sudden you bring him in and he really is Jimmy Howard? Well, then you know what? Then I may not have to play Francouz at all if Grubauer is healthy and I've strengthened my team.
And one other thing with Colorado, they did call up Martin Kaut, Russ.
Okay, good.
I don't know whether he's not having a great year in the AHL right now. So could this be, give him a couple games in the NHL? Maybe this is a showcase situation, or
I don't think it's a showcase. I think what it is I said this on Sirius XM. I was just on there. When you lose Rantanen, you can't fill those shoes. You can't trade for a guy. You can't do anything. All you could do is get somebody that you think will click with certain line mates that play with Rantanen. And if that guy could hold his own, basically skating with the physical end and popping a few points, you could get by for a certain amount of time. And I think that's what they're going to hope to do with Kaut. I mean, Kaut will probably, play on the third line. He won't play that high. But I think that's what they're going to hope to do is that he could fill a role for a few weeks. And then if they can get Kreider, they'll get Kreider. But this is more of an immediate thing. But I don't really feel it's a showcase. I think the same as Bellows with the Islanders, I never felt like he was a showcase. They needed a player. They brought up a player.
Joe, let's switch to the Sabres. The news yesterday about Zach Bogosian being suspended for not reporting to Rochester. It's not exactly a surprise, but right now the Sabres, they beat the Leafs on Sunday. They're, essentially still in the race, but I don't really think, they've got 3 teams to jump over to get back into the wild card race. So I don't conceive of them being a legitimate or realistic playoff contender. I would think that Botterill would be of the mindset of, trade some of his rental free agents and see if he can get some futures. But what do you think the organization is looking at in terms of Bogosian, in terms of some of the other guys like Sherry, Gergensen, Larson, et cetera?
Well, it's 3 teams in the wild card, but only 1 team to hop over to get back to sniffing at Toronto's heels in the wild card. I think Toronto could have delivered the death blow with a win the other night, but they didn't. but they're in it. Hey, Florida and Toronto don't want to grab it, and you want to kind of leave the door open. Sabres are going to have to go on a Andrew Hammond, Hamburglar run to be able to do it. Which, hey, fun that he's in the system. So that's some nice spooky ties to it. But as far as the trade market goes, they're in a weird. They've been in a weird spot all season where it's the ring's kind of been there to grab at it, to make a run, to add a guy to improve the team. And fans are grumpy. We know all about Dwayne and the phone call, and the legendary sports radio call finally comes to Buffalo, and that's great. But I think in this case, it's people don't like that Skinner's not didn't play with Jack all while Olofsson's out. Olofsson's back, and Skinner is on a line with Rodriguez and Sherry, which I like that. I like the makeup of that line. That's three guys with that can get on top of the puck, they can forecheck and do all those things. But unless this team unless this team gets bombed out by Ottawa and then maybe gets their teeth kicked in by Winnipeg and Pittsburgh over the weekend, I don't really see them doing anything overly drastic unless it's something to set the table for next season. Because they're still at a spot where the idea of the playoffs is still hanging around. It's still kind of there, and if they keep winning, that idea is still going to be there. And it's it's the fallacy of the points process where I would just keep getting points. We can do this, and just ask Boston how it is about keeping Tampa off their heels, and Tampa trying to catch Boston at the top of the division. Neither can do it because they keep winning and they can't make up any ground. But if they want to move guys, they can move Larson to somebody and probably get a pretty good price because he's a very good player for the role that he's at. I think he's been terribly misused the last few seasons, considering his abilities. He's a dogged forechecker. He's very hard on the puck. He makes other players miserable to deal with him, and he's got the sort of makeup where you think if you put him on a playoff team, boy, he's going to get a following very quickly because fans are going to be like, how did they let this guy go? Look at the way he is, the way he drives opponents crazy with how he plays. that's the kind of makeup that he has. I think you can do that with Girgensons as well. I mean, the guy just goes hard every game. He plays his butt off, and he's the ultimate, blue collar type player. I mean, that's the kind of stuff fans here should go crazy for. But a lot of that stuff's been down the road, and they view these guys as failed prospects or whatever you want.
All right, so let's talk about that for a minute. Aside from Bogosian, who I think since every team passed on him, his career is on life support. I think the player development model is broken in Buffalo. I thought that for the last 6 months. They're not giving me any reason to think otherwise. The way I look at it is, unless you're sort of Jack Eichel, Rasmus, not Sandy, Darlene Reddy, you generally struggle in that organization. And if you do get sent down, it's rare that someone comes up and is as good as Olofsson. On the average, it seems like they're not like that. We wonder how guys get buried down there, like Asplund and everything else. And the only thing I could look at is sometimes it's the player, but sometimes it is the player development model. And it just seems like their model isn't working.
I would argue that there's some confusion when guys come up to the NHL level. I think having 5-6 head coaches in the last 7 years probably doesn't help out.
Doesn't help. No.
That doesn't do anybody any favors when they get called up. But I think in Asplund's case, I think he's a better fit as a center. He was used a lot as a winger here, and the assignments. You think it's easier to play wing, but for some guys, they're so zoned in as being a center that if you put them, if you take away the defensive assignments and just tell them that, hey, get out there and just push the puck up the ice and do this, they're a little bit a fish out of water. And I think that's kind of what happened with Asplund at the NHL level, where if he wasn't playing center, it was just kind of, all right, what do I do with what am I doing out here? What do I do with myself? And I think there's been that, and when I look at some of the other guys that they have in the system, I mean, there's guys that they want to leave in Rochester to just get better. It's Will Borgen. I mean, thankfully they've had 1,000 defensemen in the system, so they don't have to push Will.
Good example, Will Borgen. Like, Will Borgen's game isn't going to change much more. I think he can play already in the NHL. I don't understand why he hasn't really played. He was good enough for the Olympic team. To me, if he's good enough for the Olympic team, he certainly could be good enough to get a shot on the Sabres, especially with all this stuff going on.
It's because they have 9 defensemen up in the.
They didn't have 9 good ones. I mean, that's why Bogosian picked up a roster spot. I got that.
They can't create the space to bring up Borgen because they're stuck with Colin Miller and Bogosian and a couple others. It's like, I mean, that's.
But they weren't stuck with them to start the year. Like, Borgen should have been given a shot instead of maybe making the Colin Miller trade. Like, I'm just saying, there's a lot of things you could place some blame on Botterill, but there's always somebody else in the organization. When, Joe, you're the GM, you call and you say, who's ready and where should I play them? I don't know if that's working right, because I remember for years it was broken with the Rangers, and when Jim Schoenfeld left, magically it got better.
Well, I mean, this is the thing I have the problem with, because right after the All-Star break, we looked at the Sabres schedule. They had 9 of the next 10 games at home. It was going to be this is going to be the determining factor. If they win 7 or 8 of them, they're in the race. If they lose 7 or 8, they're out of the race and they could be sellers. And Joe, in typical Sabres fashion, I think they went 4-4-1. Now they're 8 points behind Toronto. They're 9 points out of the wild card. They're in that middle zone where Botterill may dump, may not dump. And if they keep these guys and they all walk away, or most of them walk away for nothing, then you have assets that you had. Now, not to say they're going to get first round picks for Johan Larsson or anything for Bogosian, but I mean, it's the worst position that they could be in. There's no determination now 6 days before the deadline, and if Botterill does nothing, I think he misses out on an opportunity to at least get something back for players that they're probably not going to bring back anyway.
Yeah, it felt like forever for that 9 out of 10 at home, but they went 5-4-1 during that stretch, which perfectly down the middle, which is kind of what this team is. They're a perfectly average team. They do some things very well. They're very good at limiting shots, and they keep it to quality opportunities, but those quality opportunities have wound up in the net for the most part, and that falls on goaltending. But they don't have a powerful offense. They take advantage of the really good chances they get, but they don't generate just a ton of empty calorie chances, which makes for a kind of a boring team to watch. But
but here's a good example, Joe. So you got guys like Curtis Lazar. He's a hole filler. He's a seat filler. You just signed someone like Taylor Lear. Maybe they should have traded for Julian Gauthier because he's a lot better than Taylor Lear. Like, there's things that the Sabres can do. I've seen enough of Taylor Lear to know he's a quadruple A guy. He's got speed, but he's going to only be able to go up there and look good for 10, 15 games, and then you're going to put him out of the lineup. They have a lot of those guys, too many of those, and they're still making decisions to add those guys. That, to me, is an issue.
Well, Lear was, I mean, that's a guy they got last year in the Bailey trade, and he was just in Rochester on an AHL contract. You know, give him an NHL deal to call him up if you need him, and that's that. I think that, but I think those are moves like that, and you know, I think the Dalton Smith thing from December, that was different motivation there as far as getting that signing done, and the one game that he did play in. That's a whole other ball of wax there, but I mean, as far as like prospects, I mean, you look at the Rochester lineup, it's not a very prospect heavy roster. I mean, it's Pilot, it's Borgen, you know, you've got CJ Smith there still, you've got Asplund, you've got guys, but it's a lot of AHL, very good AHL players, and you know, that's. Part of that is to give the prospects that you have there a chance to do well in the playoffs. As long as they don't have to play the Marlies in the first round, they've probably got a good chance. It's the kind of thing where a lot of their prospects now are either in college or they're in Europe, and they're not getting those AHL games yet. That probably changes next season, I would imagine. With Picard's going to age out of where is he, Sudbury now. Samuelson maybe is going to be done in Western Michigan after the season. Maybe he goes for another season. I don't know, but I would guess that he probably comes out after that. And you've got a bunch of guys in Finland and Sweden that are just playing games against adults out there. So there's no hurry to get them over here. And, maybe Oskari Laaksonen gets a call. Maybe, Arttu Ruotsalainen gets a chance to come over here once the Finnish League playoffs are done. It's different things when guys are out of sight, out of mind with your prospects. And that seems to be Bottrell's mentality. He sees it as a market inefficiency in getting guys out of Europe, which
is crazy. I mean, if you look at teams, it's the exact opposite now for this league.
Yeah. It's the sort of thing that makes it tough for us, trying to get an idea of how good these prospects actually are.
Right.
If they're not playing in the CHL, or if they're not playing in the AHL or whatnot, you don't really get a good idea because, the competition in Sweden, it's like, okay, it's grown men, but they're kids playing against grown men. So the numbers are going to look pretty bad until they're old enough to handle it.
You could use, Capo Keiko as an example where he was just about starring over there in the Finnish league, but he's got some deficiencies. His skating isn't great. If he isn't on a breakout pass, he's got to be really in close or he's not going to score a goal. He can't find any time. There's definitely going to be those things. But the hope is when you bring these guys over, that you can get them over the hump. I have very little faith that they could get some of these guys over the hump. And that's the problem is they're going to keep being very average if they don't.
Well, and probably Luukkonen will be in the AHL next year after playing most of the year in the ECHL. The one thing is like the one gem over the last couple of years, Olofsson, who, he was mostly developed in the SHL. He came over, he led the SHL in scoring. He came over, scored 30 goals in the AHL, which means he was pretty much a finished product.
Right, but that's my issue is there's very few guys developing there.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Olofsson's a rookie, but he's 24, 25 years old. I mean, he's not going to improve. The shot's already an elite NHL shot. I'll fight anybody who disagrees.
No, it is.
But I mean,
but we knew he could play last year. You knew he could play last year.
Yeah, that's a big point of frustration for a lot of Sabres fans that were like, "We need scoring. Get this guy up here. We need him." And they were just like, "Nope. Leave him in Rochester. They need him more there." And I think Olofsson's exceeded expectations here. I think based on you do your math with how guys from from an AHL season to the NHL, how that's supposed to project out. It was supposed to be like a 20 goal, 40 point season, which I think a lot of people would be like, hell yeah, we'll take that. But we're looking at him maybe being depending on how the last stretch of the season goes, maybe he's a 25 goal guy, maybe, and that's even with missing a bunch of games. So I think, hitting on a lottery ticket, and it's not even a lottery ticket. It's just, a 7th round guy that you took at the end of a draft that probably wasn't a very good draft for you in the first place, but just kind of on a wing of a prayer, you find a guy and oops, he evolved. He figured it out in Sweden, and then you have his rights.
Yeah, he's going to end up probably being top 5 in the Calder. Now, Russ, you mentioned Gauthier, and that was the deal that was made today. It was a minor league deal, but I think a really good deal for the Rangers because Julian Gauthier was traded for Joey Keane. Joey Keane was a 3rd-round pick a couple years ago, having an okay year with Hartford. Julian Gauthier is a former 1st-round pick. He's got 27 goals with Charlotte right now. He had 26 goals last year. I saw him play for Charlotte in the Calder Cup conference final against the Marlies. He's big. I think he's got enough speed for the NHL. I don't understand what the hell Don Waddell is thinking here.
Okay, well, I'll try and explain it. I mean, last year when Tony McDonald retired, he was the director of scouting there. They jettisoned some other scouts too, right? So there's been a change in how they're thinking and about certain players. And so I think they soured on them. Do I know that for certain? No, but I think they did. And I think they did because at times Julian Gauthier could be a little headstrong, and he's not great defensively. He's not great away from the puck. All that said, he's fast. He's got a great one-timer. He could score from bunch of different areas. He doesn't have to be in close. He's got a great wrist shot, and I think the speed is there. And so when you look at that, a guy who's 6'4", 225,
right?
Joey Keane's a decent defenseman. Don't get me wrong. I think he's a really ample puck-moving defenseman who can bring the puck up the ice and has a little upside. All that said, you're looking at Gauthier as a potential home run pick. And that to me is a bigger deal here. So I don't know. I know Canes fans are mad because they've all been saying we need a power forward, and they just traded a power forward. And we brought up the other day on Off the Post with David Cotton, there may be a path where Carolina doesn't even have his rights anymore, and it's completely up to him when his school year ends where he wants to sign because of another year of junior eligibility. So it's technically his 5th year. So Carolina may have already lost Cotton. Now maybe this is clearing a spot for Cotton. Let's see, because maybe that's why they got rid of Gauthier, so they can entice him and say, hey, look, we just cleared a spot for you. So, if that were to work out, I'd say, all right, you know what? It takes the sting out a little. If it doesn't and Cotton doesn't sign with them, well, then you lost out on 2 potential power forwards, and there's not that many of them around.
And, Joe, the one thing that sort of, just rings a bell in my head here is that if there's one team with great organizational depth on D, it's Carolina. And what do? They trade a big forward for a defenseman. So that's another aspect that I really don't get in this deal. I'm not saying Keane can't be a good player because he probably can be a good player, but I've seen Gauthier play a lot, and I think he can be an NHL maybe 3rd-line guy, especially if he improves defensively. But I think he's got a better chance of being a success story in the NHL than Joey Keane does.
Yeah, the thing that sticks out to me on this is that it has all the markings of the Rangers preparing to move somebody at the NHL level. Whether it's Kreider or if it's somebody else.
Right.
That's the part that sticks out in that for me. But, as far as Carolina hoarding defensemen at that level, I mean, Buffalo does it. They've got a few guys even in Cincinnati that should be playing in Rochester. For Carolina to do the same thing. I mean, Charlotte's a very good AHL team too. So maybe just keeping a giant stockpile of defensemen is the new market mentality for teams. But losing a guy up front like that's a forward that probably can play in the NHL right now. I mean,
he's going to get a look. There's no question.
But it's a weird move. I mean, I know Carolina's a little bit more stocked up front at forward at the NHL level, but I would still you got to score goals to win in the league. You'll want to prevent all the goals in the world, but I mean, you still got to score them too. And I know for Carolina, scoring them's not been an issue with Aho and Teravainen and all those guys, but man, just it's a strange one for me. But I follow a team that's not really eager to pull the trigger on a lot of deals. So I don't know how good I am at trying to analyze how other teams.
Well, I'll add this further strangeness. I do kind of wonder what they think of Jake Bean there now. I do, because there have been ample opportunities for Jake Bean to come up, and he certainly could skate and he certainly could put points on the board. Right. And so it does make me wonder if this new philosophy, Joe, then suddenly make someone like him available. And if it does, then that's maybe why they got Keane, because Keane can be a puck mover. Maybe they are looking for the safer guys. Keane is a safer guy.
And
Yeah,
go ahead.
I was gonna say, I know the one knock on Bean is that he's not terribly physical with what he does. He's just a natural puck moving offensive defenseman, and I think everybody wants to have that perfect hybrid of a guy who can lean into hits, take a hit, give a hit, and also still be able to get out of their own zone. And maybe Bean or Bean and Keane. I think maybe Bean's got a little bit of there's a little bit of a struggle there when it comes to the physical side, where it's hampering his abilities to be able to get out of the zone. I say that sight unseen.
Yeah.
You're right. Man, this is what I'll add. You're right, but I think that's also because of the current coach, Rod Brindamore. I think you could put Jake Bean in other systems and he'll do just fine. I think Brindamore wouldn't like what you just said, and I think there's a lot of truth to that.
I also think that this could be a little bit of a reflection of them swinging and missing on their big free agent signing over the summer, which was Jake Gardner. I talked to when the Hurricanes came through Buffalo, I think it was in December. I talked to somebody from the Canes management team and asked how Gardner was doing, and he gave the Randy Carlyle just okay moniker. And you look at his stats, I think he's minus 21. He's like the worst plus minus on that team is like -7 next to Gardner, and then Gardner's minus 21. So he's being the Jake Gardner that he was in Toronto, with the exception of he's not producing as much offensively, and that can't be good. So look, just a couple updates on some injuries here, and then I want to talk about some of the
injuries in the NHL. Really?
Yeah, shocking. Oscar Klefbom adds to the list of walking wounded for the Edmonton Oilers. He's out 2 to 3 weeks with the shoulder injury. So you add that to James Neal, you add that to McDavid, you add that to the suspension of Zach Kassian, and Joe. They just keep winning, but I think eventually, as these players drop, it's got to have an effect on this team, wouldn't you think?
Yeah, I think everybody's been kind of waiting for the floor to fall out for Edmonton all season long, and I think everybody else in that division is helping keeping the floor underneath them. Honestly,
yeah.
I mean, it helps to have Draisaitl and McDavid do these, and
Kailer Yamamoto, he's really come on.
Yeah, Kyler's. Yeah, I've been a big fan of his since his junior days, and I made me sore that Edmonton grabbed him. I wanted to see him in a different situation, but
he's another 155-pound guy too, just for those fans out there.
Yeah, those little guys just seem to make things go. It's weird how it works out. But
I used to be 155 pounds, Russ, when I was 8.
I was 175. Now I'm farther north of that.
I'm not going to check in on the weight right now. I'm just going to say that I would fit in the pre season ending lockout NHL if I were a blue liner. Let's put it that way. But yeah, Edmonton. The Edmonton thing is fascinating that they're doing as well as they are. But you wonder what injury is going to be the one that's going to be like, all right, well, that's about wrap it up here for these guys. But
this could be it. I mean,
the division's just a gross mess, and that's going to keep them going. Yeah,
this may be the one because they don't have tremendous blue line depth. Even if they go out and make a trade now just to sort of plug it, it's still this may be the one that really gets them, because what they say 4 weeks for Klefbom?
2 to 3. But that's optimistic, yeah.
So let's say it's 3. That's going to be rough. So maybe they'll go out and get like a lesser defenseman. Like I saw names like Christian Folin, guys like that. They may have to get a plug like that and hope for the best.
Yeah. The other injury that was just reported, Zach Aston Reese for the Penguins out week to week with an LBI. Now we know Rutherford is probably going to make another move because that's Rutherford, and they've got cap space because they moved out Galchenyuk in the deal for Zucker, so they have most of the Gensel LTIR money still to work with. And Joe, I think they probably are going to go for a defenseman because Marino's out and Dumoulin's still out. But I wouldn't be surprised if they found a cheap forward out there like a Tyler Ennis for Ottawa. That you probably get for a 3rd or a 4th round pick. I wouldn't be surprised if Rutherford goes that route.
I think Ennis would be a wise move for somebody who needs somebody to play lower in the lineup to score a little bit. Mm-hmm. I think that's a great idea because I think he's played very well this season. when it comes to Pittsburgh, I can't help but think of Zemgus Girgensons as need a guy for down to the lineup. I mean, Girgensons, he's got a home in Pittsburgh. He and his wife, they live down there. So he's a guy, I think, stash it away for summer knowledge when it's time for free agency. That
he feels like a big pierogi guy. I could see him liking pierogi.
Well, I mean, when your wife's from Pittsburgh, I think you want to keep, a happy home. That makes sense. But
everybody loves a garbage plate.
But I mean, it's but I think to me, I think Zemgus is a perfect guy for a team like Pittsburgh. You don't have to sweat the offensive side of things. You got Malkin, you got Crosby, You got those guys, and you're without Gensel, but they still seem to score goals. It seems to not be an issue, and I think you need those wear and tear guys down in the lineup, and a guy like that would be perfect to have in Pittsburgh. But I think if you want somebody who's got a little bit more of a scoring touch, then Ennis makes a ton of sense too. It must be nice to be in a spot like Pittsburgh where you don't have to do a gigantic move to make your team better.
Right.
That's the thing for Jim Rutherford. He can make these smaller moves with they might be named players, but he can make these moves all day, and he's happy to do them. But you're not really messing with the core of your team at all, and that's if I was another GM, I'd be jealous of that all day long.
I do want to mention, Mike, because we're on the Pittsburgh thing. Yep. As far as Marino goes, this wasn't like voodoo with Jim Rutherford getting him. Apparently, when Marino was down to that 30-day window with the Oilers knew he wasn't going to sign with them. So when Pittsburgh came a-calling, they let him talk to Marino and see if that was amenable. They were just looking for a team for him to go to at that point. So I think anybody who would have called would have had a chance to talk to Marino to see if he was going to potentially sign with you. And so that's where Edmonton just took anything for him, because they literally had to move him in 30 days.
Right. It was like the Zach Hyman deal a few years ago with the Leafs. He was going to be a free agent on August 15th, and they got Greg McKagan, a 6th round pick or something like that for him.
Hey, Greg McKagan's a great Ranger. Don't knock him, man.
There you go. The update here: Elliot Friedman reporting that Jim Benning in Vancouver announced strategically after the Toffoli trade that Besser's injury may be more severe than thought, and he may be out.
Joe Yerdon said that.
Yeah, may be out for the season. So
I didn't say how serious it was. I just heard that there were concerns that it might be longer. I didn't know.
Well, those rib cartilage things are tricky. There's no question the rib cartilage things are tricky. I feel bad for Besser here because he's got so much talent, but the injuries, have piled up on him the last couple of years.
Now, a couple things, Joe. I look at the race in the East right now. I mean, Carolina's looking for a defenseman. Columbus, I think, is looking for anything they can get their hands on because they're so shorthanded with injuries.
And healthy.
Yeah. Philadelphia is looking for a third-line center, but they don't have any cap space to do it. Toronto and Florida, I think, are in the market, but I don't see any deal out there that changes their fortunes from being abysmal defensively to being at least okay. So I don't know where these teams go in the East, if there's going to be deals made, or they're just going to say, we're going to go with what we got and see where luck takes us.
I think it's unfortunate for both Florida and Toronto that they have teams that are loaded up with defensemen. It's whether it's Carolina or it's Buffalo, like right in the muck with them, where maybe not necessarily Buffalo's in the muck with them, but we're a team where you could call and maybe figure things out. But I would get the feeling that neither of those teams want to really lend a hand to the Leafs or the Panthers. That goes against what they're aiming for. That's too bad on their case, but I would argue that in the Leafs situation, that getting defensive help has been something that's been a problem for 2-3 seasons,
10 years.
Yeah. So that's a known issue, and they've tried to fill that in, from within, and it's tough to do when you're throwing Sandin and Liljegren and those guys right into it and saying like, all right, buddies, it's your time. We got to do this, and it's a hard adjustment. But
something to mention about Florida here. I mean, again, it's not that crazy to say that Sergei Bobrovsky's season is disastrous, and the fact that you only really have Dridger and Montembeault as your backups, it wouldn't shock me if they get another goalie at the deadline, because I think there's going to be a moment where Quenneville is just tired of Bob playing lousy and waiting for him to catch fire while he's falling out of the playoffs. And so it wouldn't shock me if they get a short-term guy to sort of play some of those other games instead of the younger guys that they have, less proven guys. And maybe that's where, like an Anderson or Howard, again, you just take a shot at it because Bob's giving you nothing. Like, he's horrible right now.
It sounds to me, though, Russ, that because, I mean, Talon came out and said, well, I'm looking for a veteran stabilizer that I can play with Ekblad, and that's his. But they don't have a ton of cap space to really do that. So I don't know, where and how they're going to make that move. And in regards to Toronto, Joe, ideally they did not want Sandin and Liljegren to come up and have to play, but the injuries to Cece and Riley forced it. And Russ, tonight they're benching Liljegren and they're playing Martin Marincin. So
yeah, see, there you go, falling back.
They didn't trust Liljegren to play any more than 8 or 9 minutes on Sunday, and now they're putting in Mr. Giveaway. Martin.
Here's how bad Bob's season is. He's a -17 for GSAA. And that's where you're sort of supposed to look at the goalie and see what he prevents on his own. He's not preventing anything.
Yeah. Now
proving right now.
Well, when it comes to Florida, though, isn't their problem that they don't have enough forwards? Wasn't I seeing that they were playing
Pizik and Mathis on the wing?
Yeah, were better forwards than some of their depth forwards.
Yes, but you know what? I'll put those 2 offensemen on a line. I still need someone to stop the puck, or I'm going nowhere.
Yeah, and they placed Hauerluck on waivers, and they lost him to Ottawa. And there's another winger. So it's like, what are you going to do? Put Ekblad on the left wing?
I don't think it's a stretch that at some point Dale Talon could lose his job. I feel pretty comfortable in saying that.
Yeah. Now in the West, right now.
Wait, hold on. Maybe Joe wants to chime in. He's got the.
Okay,
he's got the bitter,
I'm making a face at that. Just
he's got the bitter beer face on.
It's
He's not drinking Natty Lights.
To do and seeing how they've got, they went out and got Joel and Dale have their, they've got a great relationship, but I haven't seen that. That just seems like a strange move to me. The stranger move to me was spending all that money to get Bob in the first place, because that was never Talon's really great operation in Chicago, was to have
spent the money on Bob. He gave a horrible contract to Matheson. I mean, if you go down the line, there's been some really bad moves in this organization.
Yeah. I'm not saying that there's not reason to do it. I'm just saying it would be really strange timing to do it now, just because.
Remember, Peter Lugo. The one thing to remember is Peter Lugo is still in that organization, and so you never know if he's gonna, at some point look at all this and say, if they don't make the playoffs, something's gonna happen, Joe. That's all I could say.
Are you saying like old Flyers habits die hard, where you go and spend on a goalie and he doesn't work out?
Yeah. Yeah, and the chatter that came out over the weekend.
Sean Burke comes to mind, whatever. They didn't spend on him; they picked him up, but
the chatter that came out over the weekend of them potentially shopping Vincent Trocheck doesn't make any sense to me.
Makes no sense.
Yeah, I mean, because they have a 1-2 punch up the middle, and unless Trocheck and Quenneville just don't get along, you're gonna put Barkov on an island without a number 2 center behind him. That makes absolutely no sense whatsoever.
And the problem is now, maybe you have to trade someone like Owen Tippett that's taken a little longer because he's not great defensively.
Right.
You may not want to, Joe Quenneville may not put up with an Owen Tippett. And now all of a sudden, I'm not even going to get him. And he's got an amazing shot. But he'll never get in the lineup because he's not a two-way guy.
Now, in the West, and we'll just be brief on this, I don't think Vegas can really make any move because they're up against the cap. Vancouver's made their moves. Arizona has made their move with Taylor Hall. I think the moves, if anywhere, they're coming out of the Central. And Joe, with Bouwmeester, I think it's pretty safe to say out for at least the rest of the year. Tarasenko apparently is skating, so they think he might be back probably by mid-March. I think the focus of Doug Armstrong is probably have to go after a defenseman because they need that depth on the blue line.
Yeah, Tarasenko coming back is like I think that's their big deadline move is, you're getting a 40-goal scorer back. But yeah, they could use a little help on defense. Vegas to me seems like a team that really needs a lot of help on defense.
Yeah,
on the right side, and I think that's maybe why there's a lot of chatter amongst fans that Buffalo and Vegas making a deal makes a lot of sense because, hey, look, Buffalo's got a lot of right-hand defensemen, even without Bogosian.
Colin Miller, Vegas.
I think it's safe to say in Vegas, it might be time for Derek Englund to fill that role as the community relations guy and not on the blue line there.
Well, they've
been holding for him for a couple of years now.
But I mean, I look at, just contracts and things like that, and it's a fan's dream. It's a hockey's future board dream to be able to try to figure out the salaries between Vegas and Buffalo to try to make a deal, try to conjure a trade to happen there, whether it's it's a Ristolainen or a Montour going, and then you move like a Riley Smith or an Alex Tuck, which I don't think Vegas would ever give up on him, but it's the kind of thing where it just makes you go, man, they could do something here if they want to. And
you know what the problem is, Joe?
Deals like that just don't always happen at the deadline.
Cody, the problem is when you have Fleury, he keeps you super competitive, but they still don't have a farm system full of players yet because they're still a new team. So they're not loaded down there. At some point, they do need to load up down there because this isn't going to last forever. And how long can you keep trying to do this and maybe get back to the cup where you should really be building, because there's going to be a time when this team falls off.
Yeah. And, I see how well Nick Suzuki's done in Montreal, and it's like, Pacioretty's been fantastic. So I don't think you feel too bad about that. But I mean, on the defensive side of things, they haven't really invested a ton on the blue line.
Nope.
Because when you go out and you trade for a Shea Theodore and you get Braden McNabb out of LA, and you're thinking like, all right, well, hey, we got young defensemen here. We don't really need to spend a lot of these high picks on getting defensemen. Well, joke's on you guys. You got to get them all the time, and you got to develop some of these guys. And I know they like White Cloud.
White Cloud's pretty good. I will tell you this, Joe. Sorry, White Cloud is pretty good. I mean, I don't know if he's a long-term NHL guy. That's the problem. He may just be a plug. The problem is you pivoted from Gallant, and when you pivoted from Gallant, that now changed the way they play defense too. Yeah, and I mean I think that's a bigger issue than lets on when it comes to these teams changing up coaches and everything. And I think that even the same thing applies in Buffalo. I mean, you go from Phil Housley, who wanted your defenseman to run and gun, to Ralph, who wants everybody to be responsible. That makes a big change for everybody. It's a big adjustment for everybody. And I think that might be an area that, these teams that make these changes, they have to identify that really quick. And if they're going to back that coach for the next few years, you better figure out which guys are meant to stay in that system. And then if they're not meant to stay there, get them out and get some help elsewhere.
Well, Joe, thanks for coming on. It's going to be an exciting next 6 days before the deadline, and glad to get your input on what's going on in the league. And
I did survive a show with 2 Yankee fans, so kudos to me.
Yes. Well, it's always better to be friends with people who root for the 27-time world champions.
Well, it's better to be able to have us all come together like an episode of Transformers where a bad guy comes out of nowhere and everybody teams up to beat them. Now it's the Astros. It's all punched down on them.
That's fair. I'm with you. Well, actually, back in the day, there was a lot of punching down with the Astros and Gillies. And now it looks like there's going to be a little bit more.
And strangely enough, the bad guy looks like Justin Verlander. For Joe Yerdon, for Russ Cohen, I'm Michael Agello. Thanks for watching, and we'll be back tomorrow. And without the buzz, it's just